Our work began with a call from God, but not the kind of call you might imagine. There was no white light, no crack of thunder, no irrefutable command. For us, the call came as a quiet offer, a gentle tugging of the heart. Ours is a story of what can happen when God is followed without knowing the why, the how, or the when. It's a story of what can happen with a single step in the direction of faith. For us, that step led to Rwanda. Handspun Hope is an ecumenical ministry working in northern Rwanda. We currently have a full-time staff of 3 in the United States and employ over 150 people in Rwanda. The majority of our Rwandan staff are at-risk women who were once considered marginalized. Many of them lost their husbands, parents, and other family members during the Rwandan genocide against the Tutsi, which occurred in 1994. Most of our ladies are living with HIV. All of them were living in extreme poverty, were considered the poorest of the poor within their communities prior to being hired by Handspun Hope. The ladies are employed at our facility in the village of Musanze, where they process merino and Angora wool. We have a sheep farm nearby where shepherds and farm staff care for our own flock of sheep. When the sheep are sheared, the fleeces are brought to our cooperative where the women clean and card the wool, spin it into yarn, and dye it organically using local Rwandan plants. Avocado pits, onion skin, and eucalyptus bark are a few examples of the organic material used to dye our yarn. Once dyed, the ladies then knit beautiful finished goods, including hats, gloves, scarves, and sweaters. In addition to raising sheep, we have also introduced German Angora rabbits to the women and to Rwanda, providing an additional source of raw material for making yarn. In 2018, the ministry began importing Ethiopian cotton from a women's cooperative in Ethiopia. The cotton yarn is organically dyed by the women working for Handspun Hope in Rwanda. Like the Angora wool, this has created another revenue source. Handspun Hope is a ministry answering the call that God laid out in James 1:27. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress. We believe the poverty cycle can only be broken after a family is stabilized, through relationship with Jesus Christ, through gainful employment, access to regular, healthy meals, and through the education of children. Handspun Hope provides fair wages, a safe working environment, and health care for every woman employed. We contribute toward the educational fees of every child in the care of our employees, many of whom are caring not only for their own children, but for the children of a deceased family member. One of the women currently cares for 9 children. 1 year of education costs approximately $80 in Rwanda. This includes tuition, books and supplies, and uniform fees. $80 is a tremendous amount of money for one family. If you have 3 or 5 or 9 children in your care, there is simply no way you can afford to educate them all. Handspun Hope eases this burden by contributing toward education-related fees. As of January 2020, we have 181 students enrolled in school. Handspun Hope also provides on-site trauma counseling for the ladies. We employ 2 full-time Rwandese-trained counselors who offer group and individual trauma counseling for the women. Every woman we employ experienced some level of trauma during the 1994 genocide. Many of the women who are HIV positive contracted the disease during the war as the result of an intentional rape campaign. Groups of men would attack women, infect them, then tell them, "We are going to let you live so you may die of sadness." Their goal was to ensure the killing would continue long after the war ended. Our counseling program has been transformative for the women we employ, so much so that 7 years ago, we decided to expand the reach of the counseling by creating a lay counselor training program. This course is provided free of charge to anyone who wants to join. Our counselors provide trauma counsel training to community leaders, doctors, pastors, teachers, and teach them how to counsel their own community. To date, we have graduated over 200 lay counselors from our program who now have the tools to help their own communities begin the healing process. So, what are our greatest needs? Without question, we need to continue expanding our counseling program. People sometimes ask, why is counseling still so critical when the genocide occurred more than a quarter century ago? When our ministry began in 2007, every woman we employed had personally experienced some level of trauma. But we are entering our 13th year of working on the ground in Rwanda. Many of our new hires were born after the genocide occurred, but they have been raised by trauma survivors who were unable to process what they experienced. Many have suffered rejection along with emotional and/or physical abuse because of it. We also have employees who are still dealing with genocidal fallout so many years after the atrocities occurred. Just last year, Edith learned the location of her family's murders 25 years after their deaths. A prisoner confessed to the murder of Edith's parents and 7 of her 8 siblings and told authorities where the murders had taken place. Our counselors were able to help Edith process this information and were able to travel with her to the location of her family's death, to revisit the devastation of their loss, and to continue the healing 25 years later. There is no question that counseling is still desperately needed. But we don't want to limit the healing to the space inside our walls. God's love is too big for that. We want to continue expanding our lay counseling training program. With additional counselors and additional space, we will be able to graduate additional lay counselors who can then continue the healing in their own communities. With your help, we hope to increase the number of lay counselor training programs offered in 2020. Our goal is to hire 3 additional counselors and graduate 25 lay counselors this year. We would like to expand our counseling facility, adding a 2nd story to our counseling building and providing additional private space for individual counseling sessions. We want to be able to provide eye exams to each woman and eyeglasses for those who need them. We want to provide salaries for the 78 women who are currently unsponsored. When salaries are covered by sponsors, it frees up funds to be used for other daily expenses. God is working on the hearts and futures of these women in Rwanda and their children. By God's grace and mercy, we are blessed to serve the people of this beautiful country. God made that gentle call 13 years ago, and, as is so often the case, taking that first step of faith set us on a journey of breathtaking transformation. What began with the employment of 10 women has become the largest employer of women in the Musanze district of Rwanda. We are changing lives beyond our own facility through the lay counselor program. We are partnering with other local schools and cooperatives to provide employment for young deaf women. It keeps getting bigger, and with your help, that growth will continue. We have been called to Rwanda, and we pray you will join us as we work to fulfill the promise God made in James 1:27, to care for the widow and the orphan. We are excited to share with you what can happen with a single step in holy direction, to witness the beauty as God offers hope to the hopeless and transforms God's beloved from the inside out.
Good evening, everyone. So excited for this. It's really great to be able to do this virtually and have so many people with us. I really appreciate you being here and joining us. My name is Diana Wiley. I'm the Executive Director and founder of Handspun Hope. We're an ecumenical ministry working with at-risk women in northern Rwanda. We're truly grateful for your time and interest to learn more about Carl Wilkens and the courage he displayed in Rwanda during 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. I first learned of Carl through a PBS special called Ghosts of Rwanda, which was created by Frontline at the 10-year anniversary of the genocide. From the very beginning of our own work in Rwanda, we recommended that volunteers traveling with our organization watch this informative film. Several years ago, I had the privilege to serve on a panel discussion with Carl, and this is when I learned more of the details of his own story. Carl was the only American to remain in Rwanda for the duration of the 1994 genocide. Working with Rwandan colleagues, he helped save the lives of his staff and hundreds of orphans. His story is really courageous and inspiring to me personally, and I know it's going to be for you also. After the film is concluded, we invite you to participate in a Q&A with Carl. Among the many lessons Carl shares from his experience is the transformative belief that we don't have to be defined by what we've lost or our worst choices. I hope that you'll remain online for this important discussion. We're thrilled to work with Carl on this virtual screening of the documentary, I Am Not Leaving. It's my honor now to introduce you to my friend, Carl Wilkens. Get on, there we go.
I think we're good. Hey,
Good.
Diana, thanks so much.
Yes.
Thanks for hosting this event this evening, and I am really looking forward to the conversation. I love it when things cycle around. You mentioned about being on a panel quite a few years ago there in Texas, and then with the Texas Holocaust Museum program a month ago, got to cross paths again. And thank you very much for hosting the film, and thanks for the work you're doing in Rwanda. I could watch that promo video over and over. It just makes me homesick, and I love to see all the beautiful pictures. You know, Rwanda for so many years has, for many people, just been genocide, which is understandable, but a horrible reputation. And I loved all the beautiful pictures you have there in the video. So thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to the conversation as well. In fact, I'm going to load up the video right now. Okay. I don't know. Do you think we've got most of the folks on?
I think so. I think most everyone is here.
I mean, hopefully we haven't had any technical difficulties. And I'm assuming, do most of the folks have your email or something that they could shoot an email to you?
Everybody that's registered has my email.
If you're having trouble logging on, just shoot an email to Diana, and hopefully they'll be able to talk you through it as we come here. And so let's just load up this next little video here. And this video is 40 minutes long. We made it primarily for students at schools where I get the opportunity to go and share stories from the Rwandan genocide. Teachers are, given historical background, and we learn so much through books and then through movies, but to actually sit down and talk. In fact, maybe some of you were fortunate enough to have a Holocaust survivor come into your classroom, and you can kind of connect the dots in terms of how powerful a personal story is. And I love bringing the stories from Rwanda, especially stories today of the healing. So I'm looking forward to that part of our conversation. In the first about 7 minutes of the film, there is some graphic images from news footage, archival news footage at the time. So if we have any kids with us this evening, younger ones, maybe now's time to go make some popcorn or something, and you'll come back in at about the 7-minute mark. And we shouldn't have, maybe it's 8-minute mark. I'll put a little chat here in a minute. I'll double check that point there. I meant to do that earlier so I can tell you exactly when it'll come in. And actually we can put a little chat in the conversation when I know we're at the point where there'll be no more graphic images. So hopefully you do see easily that chat function on well, some screens it's different depending on your device. But okay, one other thing. There's not a lot of historical background, so we can dig into that after if you'd like to with your questions. Like I said, it was targeted for students at schools. We already have some more. But as you read in the opening lines of the film, I want you to really focus on this word. This genocide came from political manipulation of ordinary people. This isn't a result of one group of people hating another group and so much friction until boom, it explodes. There's nothing spontaneous about genocide. So it is a politically driven, and they will then find ways to divide and us and them, and they will start to then be very clearly tribal, and it'll be the Tutsi people clearly targeted to be eliminated. But I just think it's really important for us to understand this didn't start in the hearts of ordinary people. This was a strategy of extremist politicians and businessmen and women. You'll see a soldier in the early scenes reaching in a pickup truck. He's grabbing an ID card because often you couldn't tell who's a Hutu and who's a Tutsi because they married each other so much. So I think that's probably enough setting the stage, and we will go ahead and hit the play button here for it now.
Tango Whiskey, do you copy? Tango Whiskey, this is 76, go ahead. Some kind of disturbing things.
I think it was really interesting in Rwanda that when people were ordered to leave, for some people, the idea of staying didn't even occur to them. And of course, the killing going on around here, the smart thing to do is get out of here. Get those who you love and safely get them out of there.
The senior rebel official said the government forces and militia were responsible for the genocide of between 500,000 and 1 million people.
I spoke to several refugees who said there aren't going to be any Tutsis left in Rwanda.
But in every situation we have a choice. I mean, the choices might be greatly restricted. There's people who'd like to take that choice away, and sometimes we'd like to give that choice to other people. But it boils down to really we do have a choice. And lucky is the person like me who had somebody like Teresa standing next to me making that choice together. Went to Africa the first time as a college kid. Came back to the States and fell in love. So as soon as I got married with this beautiful girl, 6 weeks later we moved to Zimbabwe. Our daughters were born there, so Africa just kind of got in our blood.
You know, I didn't give a whole lot of thought to what was ahead after I say I do. I knew he was an adventurous person, and I was excited about living overseas.
When we moved to Rwanda, our first projects were to build schools, working with ADRA, Adventist Development Relief Agency.
Yeah, I met Carl Wilkens in 1990. Time he came to be director for ADRA. Someone was surprised how American young have 3 kids, first dad.
We were excited to be able to raise our kids in Africa. And Rwanda, like other countries we had been in, was very welcoming. The neighborhood kind of took our kids in as neighborhood kids.
The kids would go to school, Carl would do his work. I'd take the kids swimming on birthdays. We'd go camping. So it was very normal for us. We were pretty much untouched by the conflicts that were simmering underneath.
And we had 2 Rwandans working in our home, Janvier, the night watchman, and Anita, who not only worked in our home, but she lived with us. And so Anita just proved to be a really kind, thoughtful, she was great with the kids.
She would stay with us through the week. We had a room in our house with a separate entrance, and we grew to love her very much, like part of our family.
Beginning in about January 1994 is when we started to pick up the undertones of unrest. I was the person who was supposed to bring the Rwandan and Tutsi militaries together for various dialogues, and you got a sense that there was a tension between them. Some of it you'd expect, but other aspects of it, you knew that there was something unsettling.
We didn't know the word genocide in the months before, but we could tell there was a lot of tension, and there were rumors of pickup trucks with machetes coming in. And then there were massacres. 50 people, 20 people, 100 people. You know, I started to find out some of my workers were Hutu and some were Tutsi. Up until that point, I actually didn't know who was who, and they worked together in a way that wouldn't indicate that there was a problem.
There was enough of a counterbalance of those who wanted to see peace succeed that everyone thought that any of those attempts to foil the peace would fail. Of course, all of that was proven wrong when the plane was shot down, and then in the next 24 hours there was a carefully orchestrated plan that was executed.
What's going on here, huh? We got all the kids in the hallway and the television. This is April 7, and we're watching TV in the hall. It's about 6 o'clock in the morning, and we were woken up at about 5:15, 5:20 by a lot of gunfire and stuff. The day after the plane was shot down, there was slaughter going on at an orphanage to the east, and we were talking on our ham radio with them, and they reported people coming onto their campus and people being killed there at the orphanage, and they were begging us to get help. Please send the UN. And so I managed, after quite a few attempts, to get the UN on the phone. The UN guy was really shook up, and he said they had lost control of the airport. And I'm like, what do you mean you lost control of the airport? You know, how does the UN lose control of the airport?
I remember looking across, seeing groups of mostly probably young guys. They'd be carrying sticks or machetes. They'd be moving in groups of 6 or 8 probably, going from one house to another, and it was very horrifying to think of what was happening.
People starting moving around. What's going on? Afternoon, there's a soldier from Chikondo, from our area, must kill all the Tutsis. That military who came, he put it for machete. That day he killed that young boy. Wow.
The term Interahamwe is a Kinyarwandan term. I believe it means something like those of us who work together. And they managed to work the idea that if they didn't kill all the Tutsi, they would be enslaved by the Tutsi, and that they were fighting in self-defense, that this was a duty of all Rwandan Hutu citizens. And that's how they were able to mobilize everybody to this very twisted collective insanity.
Towards the end of that first day of killing, a gang actually gathered at our gate. We didn't know about this until the next morning, but we found out that our neighbor ladies had come out, stood between the gates, stood in front of these guys with clubs and machetes, and they said, no, you can't go into our house. They started telling stories about our family, doing little acts of kindness. Basically, they said their kids play with our kids. We were shocked to find out that we had been targeted, but then even more amazed at the courage of these ladies. They risked their lives for us.
My first and only priority in many ways was finding out where every single American was and how we would get them safely out.
So it probably would be Friday evening. Teresa and I would start making the decision about what we're going to do, and especially about Anita and Janvier, who were targeted because of their Tutsi ID cards. The embassy had made it really clear that Rwandans could not be evacuated in the convoy, that would put everybody at risk. And so that option was out. Thinking that they could stay and barricade themselves in the house, nah, the house would be broken into and they would be slaughtered. And so really, there just didn't seem like many options, except if, I was able to stay, perhaps my presence would stop the militia. There was a huge respect for foreigners in Rwanda, a real valuing of foreigners.
His personality, his heart was such that there was no other option because he saw people suffering and he can't just leave it and not do anything about it. For me, it's a matter of, can I stand with that?
My parents were visiting at the time, and I was really glad my dad could drive the family out so Teresa could be with the kids, but still.
I think Carl recognized it was a hard decision, not just for him, but yet we could be looking at the possibility of never seeing each other again.
The harder part of this decision was her part, definitely. Much, much tougher for her to leave with the kids.
And I know at that point in time his thinking was, and I agreed totally. I knew as adjunct director, he's there for not just the development aspect, but for the relief aspect too. He's been already working in these camps. And so it just seemed that it wouldn't be right not to stay. The right thing to do is to stay.
I'll never forget standing by our bedroom window, looking out at the city, which is built on hills there in Kigali, and holding her and thinking, this is what it's come to, and this is the right thing to do. And so I'm on the radio now, and I was telling Laura at the embassy, I'm sending my wife and family to the American ambassador's home over. She says, what do you mean you're sending them? We're all leaving, everybody, shredding documents, locking the doors, everybody leaving over. And I said, no, I'm not leaving. He kind of paused, and you don't have a choice. And yes, I do have a choice, and you can see this going back and forth. And finally she says, okay, then I need you to sign on a piece of paper that you've refused the help of the United States government to leave Rwanda.
And I remember thinking how incredibly hard of a decision that must have been to be separated from his wife and kids and make the decision to stay. He had the opportunity, because he had an American passport in his hand, to leave the country and find safety. And instead, he was choosing to stay and let the people that he loved the most in this world go on overland without him.
In leaving, I did feel like, we were abandoning him. And though he tells me he never felt abandoned, I just, when we're all leaving and you're leaving someone behind, you do get that sense that you're abandoning them.
A beautiful sunny day. This is Tuesday, and nobody can believe what is hidden by this beautiful sunny day.
Here you can see is the corner of our yard. This house over here is just on the other side of the street. You can see the hole in their metal roof from where a small rocket landed this morning.
There was a 24/7 curfew. The government said nobody is allowed out of their house. The only people on the streets were the people who were doing the slaughter. The pastor and his wife who had joined me, she would buy stolen food or propane bottle over the fence. It was a survival time those 3 weeks. How can we get enough food and water just to survive? Electricity went off yesterday, and it's so... Come in, Ma. During those first 3 weeks, there were several incidents when soldiers came, wanted to know who was there. I mean, there was this time that we actually paid off the militia about $100 to save the lives of the people in our house. You just did what you had to do. Each threat, each challenge that came. Fluffy doesn't seem to be bothered by the shooting. And Poacher up there, he's just looking all around and... What's up? That seems too close. Well, here's the whole bedroom radio station. So I think it was about the second week of the genocide that, it was really sinking in on me. I might not see my family again. I started thinking, I gotta leave some sort of record. And so I found some old medical lecture tapes that I'd gotten from my brother and started recording over these tapes what was happening. Okay, this is Sunday morning, April 24. And should have a radio contact here with Teresa very soon. I remember listening for her voice. There'd be static on the radio and stuff, and then I'd hear this sweet voice come over the radio. 7676, this is Tango Whiskey, do you copy? And I'd push the button and go, yes, Tango Whiskey, this is 76, go ahead.
Initially, when he wasn't out and able to move around, we'd talk for a long time. I think maybe up to a couple hours.
I would ask her at different times, are you still okay with the decision, you know? Is everything really all right? And trying to sense from 1,000 miles away through a staticky radio how she's doing. And she always just came back to me rock solid, like, yes, absolutely.
Usually we'd talk once in the morning and then again late at night when he got back. And no matter what the newspapers were saying, no matter what the newscasts were saying, you know, I'd hear all kinds of reports about the horrible things that were going on. But just to know that he was doing okay and that he came back safe every night was huge.
Eventually, an announcement came over the national radio. The government was giving permission for people to come out and get a travel document, a laissez-passer. And so when I heard that word over the radio, I thought, okay, this is our chance. Because during that 3-week time, I was thinking, okay, I stayed to hopefully save the lives of these 2 people, but there's got to be more. The morning I actually left the house, I remember thinking, we've developed a routine and this sort of feels like there's security here within the fence of our yard in our house. And now I'm venturing out and I wasn't sure what I would find out there. I had talked on the radio to the Red Cross. I knew the killing was still going on. So yeah, it was with a lot of uncertainty that I ventured out that first day. It was great to have Pastor Soraya along. I really counted on his advice. And then to have Dawson, one of my ADRA guys. We had been through tough scrapes already. Backing the car down the driveway, I knew the first roadblock was less than 100 yards away. Fortunately, it was a neighbor, the tailor man, who was there. Strange to see him, instead of at his sewing machine, having a machine gun in his hand. But he wasn't too difficult. But there was another roadblock we came up to, and they were shouting, "Belge, Belge," as we drove there. You know, they saw a white guy in the car, and I guess thought I was Belgian. And I said, no, I'm an American. I'm not Belgian. And the guy says, good. You know, there was a rumor going around that Belgians had shot the plane down. He says, because if you were a Belgian, and he kind of draws his knife across his throat and laughs. He says, this is what would happen to you. And you know, as we wandered through some of the neighborhoods, it was really strange. They were deserted like ghost towns. I remember this one guy sitting on a couch. They drug it out next to the street, and he had an old shotgun across his lap and a monkey on a leash. And there were little kids who were playing with Westerner toys at a few places. I'm sure they hadn't seen those toys before. And, you know, stuff was drug out of houses and on the streets. It was apocalyptic. It was just really like a whole different world. Finally, we made it to the office of the government headquarters. And as we were waiting there, I saw a man walk in with a military uniform. The guy had a real presence about him. Greeted people as he walked around. And as he came and talked to us, I introduced myself. And I explained that ADRA was still there. You know, not that we had much, but we wanted to help any way we could. And he said, well, yeah, there are some groups of orphans that are needing help. I can send you with my social affairs man to visit these orphanages, and you can see what you can do. It was strange that this man actually ended up giving me my marching orders. He's the one who, to a large degree, determined what I did for the remainder of the genocide. And he quickly put together the document I needed, the travel permit, signed it and stamped it. And I walked out of the office with this paper that was going to be so crucial to moving around the city. The first time I drove into Gisimba Orphanage there with Colonel Renzajo's assistant, I saw these little bumps in the parking lot in the dirt, you know, they're fresh mounds. And I said to Damas, the director of the orphanage, I said, are those graves? And yeah, they were graves. They were of children, orphans who had died not from the active slaughter, but died of diarrhea, dysentery. There was no question we had to get water to the kids, but how are we going to do it? And who's going to help me? And I can't imagine doing this without my 2 ADRA men, Dawson and Gasigua.
Dawson came to my home, so he told me, Wilkens is still in here. Oh, that's good. How? He's working, he wants you to go to work. Oh, that's good. That's good news.
That was definitely a regular part of every time I got out of my house, get water to the orphans, get water to the orphans. And in between, try to find some food, try to find some medicine. The fighting sometimes was so intense I couldn't venture out. But each time I was pinned down in the house, I would picture these kids with their little metal cup. You know, they would line up when I got there with water, just for one cup of water. The dependability of Dawson and Gasiko during this tough time was just amazing. And you know, both of those guys had people in their homes. Gasiko had more than 40 people that came looking for protection.
People to come to my home. You are coming. There's nothing, what can I do? I open, especially kids.
And he said when the Interahamwe would come to the place, he would give them a chicken. I mean, he had this little chicken farm and he'd give them a chicken, like a chicken for a life. And as I got out and I started to meet both the players in terms of those orchestrating the killing, but then also meeting people like Damas at Gasimba Orphanage with his 80 that eventually grew to more than 400, you started to see places where opportunities where you could make a difference. So Teresa would send some money through the UN, and from the UN to me, and from me to some of the killers who were in charge of the downtown section of the city. They were my bank, and they would change the money to local currency. And then through some ladies at the market, I found out thieves who had a stash of powdered milk, and I'd make a deal and buy powdered milk from them. But then I couldn't take all the powdered milk from them to my house. They'd rob me. To the orphanage, they'd rob me. So I would take the powdered milk to Renzaho's office, who gave me storage space there. And it was a network of thieves and killers who helped me to supply the orphanage, and even the colonel providing storage space. Pretty bizarre.
I got here in late May, and by that time most of the killing in the city was pretty well over, but there was still a lot of fighting. And there were a lot of areas where we found it very difficult to travel. And Carl's voice would come over the radio in the middle of the night, reporting in from these places that we were afraid to travel. And we just couldn't understand how he was able to get from place to place to check on his orphans, as he did every day, and still live. He went through the worst areas of town. And when I say worst, it was unimaginable, thinking back on it. I tried going through some of them in the daytime, usually with escorts and armed people with me, and still it was frightening. You'd be surrounded by craved people with death in their eyes, with all sorts of hideous weapons, homemade usually, clubs with nails. I still don't understand how he survived, or how he was able to do the things he did. Most of our people were just absolutely astounded at his courage and at his success.
There's this one water story, I still shake my head when I think about it. We had managed to come up with some barrels from a factory. I think they were syrup or something. They were gunky, they needed to be cleaned out. And the water point was just clogged with hundreds of people. So asking them, excuse me, while I clean these barrels, you know, it was like, that's not gonna work. And somebody pointed out that there was a faucet, a water tap down the road a couple hundred yards. And I said, well, won't there be long lines there? They said, well, there's sometimes sniper fire there, but you could check it out. And so I thought, well, I went down kind of cautiously. Sure enough, there were kids there filling up their own water jugs, and they all gathered around, Mzungu, Mzungu, you know, that's what they would call foreigners. What are you doing? And there was one older boy among them who spoke French, and so I could communicate with him. And I explained I needed to wash these barrels, and these kids all volunteered to jump in, and actually we formed an assembly line, and one little one put her hands in a funnel shape over the hole in top of the barrel, and someone else would pour some sand in and someone some water. Not too much water, we don't want it too heavy, and they would roll it up a little hill and back down, slosh it around. Someone else would pour it out, glug, 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 and then machine gun fire tore at the metal roof above us, and we all dove for cover, and I'm thinking, this thing can't go on like this. Somebody's gonna get hurt, you know? The kid who was the leader, he's like, no, just hold on, it'll be calm, and his influence really did have an impact on the other kids. And after a little bit, it calmed down, and back to your stations, and for probably 2 hours, I worked with these kids cleaning all of my barrels so I could haul water. And boy, it was hot and could have been just miserable work, but those kids made a game out of it. this kind of experience, I think it could have just killed me inside, as you saw so much killing and the suffering and of the little kids, especially working with orphans. Down the street here, we were always concerned about their safety. One day a mortar landed in the front yard and it killed one. And the second one just took most of her shoulder off. So angry, you just want to kill someone yourself as you're trying to change the dressing on this little 3-year-old shoulder. You're peeling the gauze back, and she's trying to be brave, and yet she's crying. You're so angry at people, but then you see the courage in this little kid's face, and they're ready to just keep on. They're never going to give up. And so, when the kid's never going to give up, then you know you can never give up. And you just have to you keep going.
A lot of people share the same concern exposed to people in Rwanda, but not just anybody was willing to take the risk. I thought, well, part of it is that your personality doesn't shy away from things like this, as a lot of the rest of us do. Over.
Roger, roger.
So anyway, I knew it was more than just your interest in taking risks. Over.
I guess one of the things that when you talk about the adventure element here is I like a lot of different things. There's no question about adventure and things that I guess some people would think are dangerous. The difference with this situation here is it's just no games, and there is real pain that I don't know any deeper pain that we have here on this earth that people are going through right now, and then I experience I don't know if you'd say vicariously or whatever. The stakes are real. No blanks are being shot.
Time had gone on, and you thought this is going to end, it's got to end, but it went day after day, week after week, eventually month after month, and it still looked like there was no end in sight. And fear was so real, especially the first days. You don't want to die. You love your wife, you love your kids, you want to be reunited with them. But fear would stop you from doing what God wanted you to do. And so if you ask Him, He overcomes that fear. So you say, okay, Lord, if I die today, you love my wife and kids more than me. You know how to take care of them better than I ever could. I want to be the one to do it, but I'll trust you. And once you kind of give up like that, the sting and the nastiness of fear is gone. And so many of us, me, everybody, we get sidetracked at times, and we make these choices that are really destroying ourselves, destroying our brothers and our sisters. But when you choose to look for the right way in making decisions and in taking actions and doing something, you know there's a reason to be on earth, and you know that the whole world just hasn't gone crazy as it looked like here in this country. One of the toughest days of the genocide started out just kind of ordinary tough. Gasiko and I were trying to get water out to the orphans. We took our truck to the water source and filled our barrels with water and then headed towards the orphanage. And as we came in the gate, the young brother of the director, Jean-Francois, came out, and he says, well, you're coming today as an answer to prayer. They were here yesterday, and the last day or two they had killed about 6 people at the orphanage, and they had just given the message the day before that they would come back the next day and kill everybody. They said, we don't care Hutu or Tutsi, everybody here needs to get out or get killed. He's not even finished telling me the story, and all of a sudden around us we start to see them materialize. Some start to come in the main gate, others are coming through the hedges.
So Interahamwe was crossing around for that orphanage. Time we see Carl Wilkens is starting talking to each other. What's that Muzungu doing here?
This was the beginning of what became between 2 and honestly I can't remember 2-3 hour standoff The militia just didn't move. They kind of positioned themselves all around the orphanage, but as long as I was there, they seemed not to be coming in.
Kids was inside, they was afraid, they was crying, there was many people inside, the mothers and the fathers who hiding there.
I saw their leader drive by once. I saw him walk by another time. I said to Gasikwa, siphon the water out of the barrels into the reservoir as slow as you can. We got to make this process drag on as long as we can. But eventually Gasikwa was finished.
And the Interam was still there. That's wanted to move there. Waiting for Wilkens to go. And the Wilkens also does wanted to go.
I remember talking, Mama Papa Zero, that was the UN humanitarian. Mama Papa Zero, this is Adra 1. Come in and yes, Adra 1, go ahead. And then my radio started beeping, indicating the battery is about dying. And I knew that they couldn't come really to my help. I mean, they couldn't get to that part of the city anyway. But I was just calling for whoever. I talked to Philip at the Red Cross, you know, come in, and Philip came in and says, hey, the director, Damas, is here in my office. I said, well, good, don't let him come back here. They're looking for him. And eventually, Philip was able to get a hold of the police, the gendarmes, and what kind of brought a pause in this standoff was a pickup truck load with 7 gendarmes come in the driveway. And their lieutenant gets out of the cab, looks around, military guy, used to sizing things up, and he comes to me. I introduced myself. I said, thank you for coming. Can you spend the night with the orphans? No, we're too outnumbered. Listen, this is, you know, he's a man of action. This is what we got to do. He says, I'll stay here with my men, but you need to get us reinforcements. At this point, the young brother, Jean-Francois, says, no, don't go, Wilkens. As soon as you go, they're going to kill us. Please don't go. And he starts to kind of get teary and don't go. And I'm looking at the lieutenant. Can I trust this lieutenant? You know, because some of the police had joined in massacres. So is this guy just wanting to get rid of me and he'll join the militia for this massacre? Or will he honestly stand there and hold them off? And I decided to trust him. I mean, it was a hard decision. It was, I felt sick to my stomach. I felt like I was going to vomit. Am I just trying to save my own skin, you know, or is this really the right thing to do? Trust this lieutenant, move forward. And I said, listen, Jean-Francois, I will go get help. If I don't get help, I'll come back myself. I will come back. And it just seemed like a pretty weak thing that I was leaving him with, a weak promise. But I left. I thought, man, they could stop me at the roadblock right outside the orphanage and kill me there. Or maybe I'm going to hear gunfire as I leave. And, well, I didn't. I went to the colonel's office, and I knew he was out of town already, but I still went to his office. And I found the secretary there, and the secretary says to me, as if it's good news, well, no, the colonel's not here, but the prime minister's here. Well, they had killed the prime minister the second day of the genocide, and the extremists put in their own prime minister. And so the secretary's telling me, ask the prime minister for help. And I'm like, what? This is the one who's in charge of the genocide. Why would I ask this person? This just made no sense at all to me. But there's a lot of stuff that wasn't making sense. The prime minister, Kambanda was his name, came down the hallway. He's got a whole little entourage with him, and they're coming down the hall. I step out in the middle of the hall, kind of, you know, stopping them, put my hand out, introduce myself. I'm Carl Wilkens, the director of ADRA, and he goes, oui, je te connais. You know, this is going on in French. I know you, he says, and how's your work going? And I'm like, well, it's not going good. In fact, at Gasimba Orphanage, there's a massacre that's about to happen if it hasn't happened already. I just kind of blurted it out, and turns, talks, and he says, yeah, you know, after talking with his guys, we know about that situation. Those orphans are going to be okay. Kind of like, oh, okay. Thank you, and I shake hands, and moves on down the hall, kind of leaves me stunned there. And yeah, I don't know any other reason except this guy. He stopped the massacre. A couple days later, we were able to get the orphans moved out of that really horrible situation to a less horrible situation. And it just amazed me that this man who later will be convicted of genocide is helping me save the lives of these orphans.
When I think back to those days and try to remember as vividly as I can what happened. You know, the strongest memory I have is of this deep, gnawing fear that just kind of ate away at your bowels every day. You'd wake up to the sound of gunfire. In the night, you'd hear the dogs fighting over the corpses. In the daytime, if you moved around the city, there was a smell of death everywhere. What made it possible to keep going was the sense that it would end. One day, it would end. And I can remember the day it ended very clearly. Went from a night of almost complete gunfire all night and quite a few near misses to silence. Sudden and frightening silence. And it was almost a day before we heard the first tentative sounds of life coming back. People timidly coming out of the Amahoro Stadium or crawling up from whatever holes they'd been hiding in, looking around, speaking quietly.
When the genocide ended, when the RPF drove the extremists out of power and out of the country, that first night was really quiet. It was almost hard to sleep, it was so quiet. And then it was just a few days before I was able to leave, climb into this Canadian C-130 and fly to my family to meet up with Therese and the kids. And I remember touching down in Nairobi and trying to see out the window of this kind of cargo transport plane and stretching, where's my family? And actually not expecting to see them until I went through some sort of immigration or something. And I was so surprised when they let down the steps, you know, of this cargo plane, and I came down and looked, and there was Teresa and the kids right there on the tarmac a few hundred feet away, and ran to them, and the kids running towards me, and down on my knees hugging and kissing, and up with Teresa and hugging and kissing. And
seeing that plane coming in, landing, and then watching him come towards us, kids running towards him, and yeah, it was really amazing, more than what we'd been dreaming about all the days and nights before as it led up to that. I remember Mindy saying, "Dad, you need a haircut." And of course for me, just hugging him and realizing, you know, how he's a lot thinner than 3 months before. It was a really good reunion. It took some time to absorb the idea that, hey, this finally has ended, but it just was exciting to have him back.
Just incredible memories of the beginning of like a whole new world, a whole new life. By many people's standards, I should have been slaughtered with those 800,000 other people who were slaughtered during this time, but I wasn't. I'm alive, and now I get to see my kids grow up and you know, at their high school and college graduation, and yeah, it was a whole new appreciation for life. Fortunately, Anita and Janvier survived. They've both gotten married, they have children. Interestingly, Janvier joined the military and has actually done 2 tours of duty in Darfur, standing up against genocide there in the Sudan. And Anita has 2 beautiful sons, wonderful husband. Tragically, she lost nearly everybody in her family. A little brother who was out of the country and a sister hiding in a convent survived, but parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, gone.
I remember, you know, talking on the open line back to European Command and to the State Department about Carl's decision, and many of the folks saying, well, did you accurately convey the situation? Does he understand, truly understand the decision he's making? And I remember, you know, saying back to them, he does, and that is why he's staying, because he believes if he keeps a presence there, if he keeps that mission open, that he can make a difference. I really wished, in hindsight, that we could have done the same thing at the American Embassy. And it is probably my greatest regret that we didn't keep the embassy open. At the time, policymakers said it was better to close the embassy down. Looking back now, boy, what a world of difference we could have made if we would have maintained that American presence.
myself, who was fighting each other, is my brothers, he was there, sister there, but no one helped. But Carl Wilkens got help some people, help orphanage. And I saw he changed my life many things until now. To do good things, better than me to do wrong things. I saw people never help one another, and it was very painful my heart. Until now, how people run, how people died, no help one another, kill someone, no do anything wrong. He changed my life.
Is this good?
Yep.
I won't get everybody, but
What do you think, Diana? Should I just explain the last 5 minutes, or should
Sure,
we try
that'd be
that
great.
one more time?
No, that'd be great. I think you're good.
Okay. Okay. Well, what is really crucial, and thank you all so much again for joining us here. I hope we all got transported into the new room. It looks like our numbers look good. Yeah, in this last few minutes, you would have seen the face. In fact, I can pull up a few pictures for you too, of Anita and Janvier, the two people who are in my home who did survive. He actually did a tour of duty in Darfur, standing up against this. I think he did 2 tours actually. And when I go back to Rwanda every year, I meet up with Anita and her sons and her husband. Sadly, she lost most of her family. Let me just pop a picture up here for you, and we'll wake this up back here. But then you would also have heard Laura Lane in the last few minutes, really regretting the fact that that they didn't stay, that the American embassy didn't stay. Here's a picture of Anita and her family, her sons. That the American embassy didn't keep a presence there in the country, and what a difference that presence could have made. And in the end, my good friend Gasikwa talked about the chaos and just how you try to make sense of this. And that's something that I'm thinking we could try to explore this evening. And I think that, good. Welcome back there, Diana. And I'm happy to explore with you any of the questions in terms of understanding that chaos and putting the pieces back together. So whether we go linear or whether we go back and forth between 1994 and today, I'm not a linear guy, so you won't throw me off. But however you want to do the questions, I'll hand it back over to you, Diana.
Okay, we do have some questions coming in, so I'm just going to go ahead and start facilitating these. There's a question from Patrick. It says, "Hi, Carl. Can you describe the impact on Kigali? Interested in hearing what the city looked like at the end of the genocide."
Sure. You know, well, it was like a ghost town, of course, in so many ways. Kigali was cut in half basically during the genocide. Some people who are familiar, maybe Patrick, you're familiar with the landscape or the geography there of the city. There's a ridge road that runs down to the American Embassy from kind of right now the new convention center to the American Embassy, and everything on what would that be, sort of east side of that road, King Faisal Hospital, the Amahoro Stadium where the UN soldiers were, that was all pretty much controlled by the RPF during the genocide. And everything on the downtown section of that road, you know, and Nyamirambo, all of that area, Gikondo, those were controlled by the extremist government. So when the genocide ended, it was crazy, like a ghost town. I mean, of course, all services had been cut in terms of electricity and water. There were 2 places we could still get water, but it was like a ghost town, but only, you know, actually for hours, kind of. And then the RPF came in and took control of the whole city, had people assembled in assembly points, and then bringing them out, checking their IDs and things, because they knew that among all the people who were there at St. Paul's Church or at other locations around the city were mixed. Some had committed genocide, some had not. So that's when they had the big challenge of trying to start putting the pieces back together. I'm gonna, as you read the next question there, Diane,
okay,
I want to pop a picture on here. Just I was back in Rwanda in December, and this is the convention center, beautiful state-of-the-art convention center where the people tell the president, instead of a what do you call it here in America? We have the president tells the State of the Union. Well, there, instead of the president telling the people tell the president. And so beautiful pictures. The city is gorgeous today.
Okay, let's see. From Becca, it says, hi, Diana and Carl, great to see you. This is Phil and Becca, friends of Diana. In the chaos, was there any church presence at all? What was that like?
You know, in the capital of Kigali, no. Of course, churches were all shut down. The shops and stuff were all closed. The only thing functioning were the traditional markets, as I saw it at least. Some areas of Rwanda where, for example, in the east, where the RPF took over that part of the country after really a matter of weeks, I know worship began to take over, worship began to happen again. And in other parts of the country, in the northwest, where there weren't many Tutsi people, some ways I'm told, I wasn't there, told that life kind of went on as relatively normal during that time. But in terms of church organizations making a difference during the genocide, I didn't see much of that. The tragedy of this story is actually the planners of the genocide wanting to get rid of the UN, 2,500 UN soldiers, wanting to get rid of the foreigners, but instead of trying to get rid of the church, so to speak, there's many cases where they show how the infrastructure of organized church, whether Catholic or Protestant, was used in the carrying out of the genocide. It's an incredible tragedy and failure for institutionalized religion at that time, from my perspective.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Evening, Carl. Thanks for sharing your story. This comes from Molly. Evening, Carl. Thanks for sharing your story. Why do you think the women helped you and your family when the militia group came to your gate?
Yeah, I love that story, and I have, I think, one photo here of my wife and one of those ladies, because you saw the drawings of those ladies in that time, and I was hoping you would be able. Okay, it's another directory, so I won't take the time right now. I was hoping that you would look into her face. I think it was our kids playing in the neighborhood for 4 years. You can see how young Sean was, literally still in diapers when we moved there. So the next 4 years of his life growing up, they were running around the neighborhood, playing with the neighborhood kids. And you see, the Rwandan genocide really challenges the idea of good guy, bad guy. Oh, was this a good guy in the genocide or a bad guy? Because there were people during the genocide who were hiding people in their home at great risk to themselves and their family. And during the day, they were out killing people. So the same person was doing these things. And I think what often was a deciding factor was the strength of relationship, and or perhaps accessing those pathways in our mind about children. And I think, you know, from what the ladies told us, they said their kids, okay, I've got to bring on a whole nother set of pictures, I guess, here. But they said their kids play with our kids. And I think that was a big factor. Our kids would go to funerals in the neighborhood. They'd be eating and running around in the neighborhood kids. Neighborhood kids would be playing at our house. I really think it was the relationships of the kids that drove those women to come out in a dark night and risk their lives for us. So thanks for asking about that, Molly.
Okay, let's see. Here's one from Lindsay. What do you see in Rwanda that gives you hope today?
Oh, you know, it is. I've got to show you the traffic circle pictures here. Christmas time. It's easy. I was there in December and all the beautiful lights and stuff. It's easy to see this beautiful city, palm trees over here wrapped with Christmas lights, and to see the skyscrapers, clean city. You're landing on the plane. They say, hey, if you have any plastic bags, leave them on the plane because they're illegal in Rwanda. But those surface things, as amazing as they are, what really gives, and security gives me hope, having safety gives me hope. But what really gives me hope is talking with the people. You know, that meeting that I was at with the 2 days of the population telling the president and the president's cabinet, you know, all the different ministries, things they're grateful for, was really interesting during that convention center time. It was really interesting how it didn't become a big gripe session, but how people were actually saying things they were grateful for, which was very Rwandan. But come down. I want to just, we won't go deep into this story because we want to give as much time to questions as we can. But this summer, often every time I go back, I'm introduced to more stories of reconciliation and healing. And here's the story of Maria and Filbert. In fact, some of you, if you want to dig in a little deeper, now that we always hope that looking at the film I'm Not Leaving begins you down a rabbit hole of exploring Rwanda more. And as you look at the website of Handspun Hope and their work there, you'll just keep exploring Rwanda more and more. And Netflix has a series called The Story of Us. Morgan Freeman. I'm a fan of Morgan Freeman. I see you shaking your head, Diana.
Yeah.
On episode number 2, about 30 minutes in, you'll see Morgan Freeman talking to the president about reconciliation. He does a nice little piece. And then I was really surprised when I saw it. Morgan Freeman was talking to Maria and Filbert. And I'm like, hey, he got to meet Maria, and Maria and Filbert got to meet Morgan Freeman. But what's so amazing about this story is how Maria has gotten so free from the anger and bitterness. Filbert was involved in the gang who literally killed her family. And Maria, through a process, well, let me just take one quick moment. I'm always trying to figure out, how do people go from kind and generous to murderers, and can they ever be trusted again? And we don't want them just like they were before. If somebody went from generous to murderers, we'd like them somehow perhaps vaccinated against a genocidal way of thinking. So this restorative journey is the big question for me as we're unpacking Rwanda and understanding just a little bit, I'm no brain scientist, but how our brains store information, and we build new pathways. You know, every time that, and the more we fire certain pathways, they've got a coating on the outside called myelin sheath. It comes quicker and quicker every time. So when you look back at Maria and Filbert, when Maria first looked at Filbert, I know she thought about the guy who killed her husband and sons, as he confessed to that. But then she learned where her husband and sons were buried, which was super important, she would tell you, to her. Because up until then, excuse me, there would be a lot of unanswered questions in her mind that would be just what ifs in her mind. We're story making people. We think in stories. That's just how we work, how our brains work. And we get a little bit of information, and then our imagination will fill in potential scenarios. But it's really hard to process scenarios because we don't know what's real. Once we learn the truth, and that's what Maria talked about, learning the truth, that helped her begin to process that. And then she and Filbert were involved in building houses together. And they started having more shared experiences, which gave them more pathways in their brain. And this is, for me, key, is we can go through shared experiences with people and come out the other side just the same. Because I can hang on to old perceptions, old memories, and keep firing those old memories. And yeah, okay, he helped me build a house, but he killed my husband and sons, And I wouldn't blame anybody who does keep firing those old memories, because they're powerful, and trauma seats them deep in our mind. But some people, like Maria, have courageously said, yes, he did. However, now he helps in my garden. He helps feed the cow. He does things for me that my sons would have done for me, and he does them willingly. And she puts her hand on his shoulder, and she says, it's wonderful to be part of making somebody beautiful again. And Filbert is beautiful. Now, I know, just telling you that story in a couple minutes, it's really not fair on many levels, because that's a story of years. This idea of how we can ever change. For some, it can be a long, long journey. And so I always just want to point that out, because it's easy for us to say, oh, no. She's an exception to the rule. And I would be right with you saying that. No, she's an exception. But she would be arguing with us. No, I'm not, she would say. And she would tell you other people too, who I think often from examples like her have been given the potential. I mean, they never would have thought of forming new pathways before. That she invited Filbert, she and her daughter invited Filbert to the daughter's wedding. Never would cross people's mind. Are you kidding me? And the story gets even more radical from many of our ways of thinking. So those are the things. Women in those stories of healing give me hope. Women in government, 63% of the parliament last time I checked. The role of women rebuilding trust gives me hope. The accountability and transparency gives, my list can keep going on and on. Now when I go back to Rwanda, as traumatic as the genocide was, first time back was tough. But now as I go back, I'm excited to see what's next, what's new in Rwanda.
Thank you. There's a question here from Ron. It says, Carl, what was your impression on how the UN handled the situation?
Oh boy, Ron. For years, in fact, I'm going to tell you, until April 2017, that would be 23 years, I was angry at the UN. I was defining the UN by their failure in Rwanda. Just real brief for those who maybe don't have as much background on Rwanda. I'll just pull a picture up here that will help illustrate this story, We've got UN soldiers in 1994. We had a 3-year war, and they signed a ceasefire, an agreement, and the world is saying, yay, good job, we're here with you. The UN sent 2,500 soldiers to Rwanda with armored personnel carriers and other types of military equipment. We, foreigners and Rwandans, thought, we're glad they're here, because there's still stuff after war. Stuff is not over. Stuff is not stable. And they brought a wonderful stabilizing impact for many, okay? We only, though, would find out when the president's plane was shot down and the killing started, that they were just there under a mandate of observers and not peacekeepers. They were not supposed to fire unless fired on. But you're like, wait a minute. Observers running around in armored personnel carriers, the war's over. We have a ceasefire here. Wait, there was a lot of mixed messages. And so that produced an enormously false sense of security. I am sure many of my Rwandan friends, I know we as foreigners, as we heard, sometimes there was some massacres that still happened in January, February, March, leading up to April. And we kept thinking, no, it's going to be okay. The UN is here. It's going to be okay. The UN is. So that false sense of security, I think, was really responsible for the death of thousands and perhaps hundreds of thousands of Rwandans. Because normally anywhere in the world, in history, people see smoke, they see fire coming, they run. But in this case, they said, no, 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 don't run. The UN is here. The UN is here. The reason I brought you to 2017 was because the Rwandan government asked me in 2017 if I would speak at a commemoration service at the UN, which was a huge honor to be asked by the Rwandan government, but it was also a huge dilemma because I didn't want to go to the UN. I was still defining the UN by its failure. Some of you, as you dig deeper into the story, you know, for years when I looked right at this picture here of the Security Council, and the decisions that they made there. And if some of you would like to go deeper and you haven't yet looked at Ghost of Rwanda, PBS Frontline, it's available even on YouTube right now, Ghost of Rwanda, and you'll understand more of the story of the United Nations. So when I was invited to go there, I was in a dilemma. And here's what, and I'll wrap this here. I'm not famous for short answers, but here's what this is my little illustration of what I was wrestling with. This is my little stop one thing thinking little sign here. I'm a visual learner, so even writing that on a whiteboard was imprinting new pathways in my brain. For years, 23 years in fact, I was defining the UN by their failures in Rwanda, ignoring any other work the UN might have been doing with gender equality or with, you know, polio or eradication of polio, or, you know, or not thinking back about their history and Eleanor Roosevelt. I love Eleanor Roosevelt, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and stuff. Nope, I was seeing one thing, and that one thing thinking was not leading me to any kind of healing or to any kind of effective partnerships, because 23 years later, a lot of people had changed in the UN, and yeah, there's still some of its institutional flaws, I would say in their institution. But that was an incredible gift for me when I realized I needed to quit defining the UN by their worst action. And that was a big deal for me too in America, and defining America by the worst action. Man, that's a big deal in defining myself by our worst action. So this is a pretty important thing for me in terms of healing and not being stuck somewhere. For years, I was stuck in 1994. So thanks for asking about the UN.
Let's see. Okay, from Cameron. In the days and months following the ceasefire, how did the different factions interact and treat each other? Were they avoiding or ignoring each other, hostile, or acting like nothing happened? How long before you began to see signs of reconciliation?
Okay, I'm assuming that's post-genocide, not between ceasefire and the genocide. We've got a couple of windows here. And I'm guessing that's after the genocide ended.
After the genocide, yes.
That's the way you read it, yeah. Honestly, I need to say I don't know. We were back there for a year and a half after the genocide, but I was busy in more of the physical rebuilding homes for widows and kind of helping infrastructure back in place. And I wasn't involved in reconciliation work, things like that. In fact, I'll be honest with you. Well, I've been trying to be honest all evening. Okay, I don't know where that expression comes from, but I was pretty angry when people came in just after the genocide and started talking reconciliation. I'm like, you know, you weren't here during the genocide, and I'm not trying to. I wasn't angry at the families who chose to leave. Not at all. I wasn't angry at them, but I felt as governments and as institutions, we failed. And to come back and start telling the people about reconciliation, I'm like, shut up. Let the Rwandan people themselves begin that journey. They will when the time is right. And then we can be partners in that process. And that's why, you know, I was so interested, Diana, as you were talking about that component of handspun hope and that you have a Rwandan lady, university trained professional in mental health, and that she is leading your program there, and that we can be partners. This is really important in post-genocide Rwanda, whether we're looking at mental health or we're looking at education or whatever we're looking at, that Rwanda is the lead partner in any initiative. It's their country. And okay, you might have some commercial enterprises that, when Volkswagen is there, Germany is still the lead partner, so to speak. But in most of our NGO type of non-government interventions and projects and stuff, the Rwandans need to be the lead partners, because for too many years, we foreigners were the lead partners, and when we left followers behind. And so Rwandan government is very clear on that now too. We welcome partnerships, we need it, but we have a strategy. We had 2020 for years, now we have 2050 strategy, and you come and be partners with us because we're a global community, but we're the lead partners. And I think that's a great shift in paradigm.
We have a question from Susan. It says, what was the key to forgiveness for each atrocities?
Susan, let me just give you, here's a kind of a big picture zoom in of after the genocide. We have thousands and thousands of people accused of killing their neighbors. Prisons are like overcrowded. I'm doing this because many of them didn't even have room initially in some of the overcrowded conditions to lay down everybody at the same time at night. Had to take turns. It was really tough, and the government is trying to put the country back together and the basic needs of the people. Now, how much of the budget are we going to dedicate to the people who are accused of genocide? I mean, it's a lot of difficult questions. And so Rwanda reached back deep into their history, and they pulled out this thing called gacaca, which is really about, can I get that up on the screen there? I think I got it there, sort of. It's really about telling the truth. Thursday afternoon, we close schools, we close businesses, and we go to the soccer field. And people can come out of prison and confess. And they could, like Maria or others, they could learn where their families were buried. We've had wonderful conversations this year because, like I said, every time I go back to Rwanda, I'm learning new stuff. And this last year, I got to go 7 times, which was wonderful for me. I think that might be standard for you, Diana. But I came back with conversations from this last time. What if somebody confesses and they're not sorry? My unexamined subconscious belief for years was, for confession to be any good, the person had to be repentant. That came up to the conscious in Rwanda's stories. And that's what's so cool about Rwanda. So often it brings these subconscious, unexamined beliefs that often impact our thinking, feeling, and actions. We need to examine them and find out, are they really true? And this one is like, no, there's a lot of value that can come from a confession from somebody who's not sorry. You learn truth. And that truth, you can, like I said, hard to process the what if scenarios. But when you learn truth, then you have a choice to, number one, accept it, because it's hard to accept something you're not sure of the details. That, okay, they said my family was killed. I don't know where they're buried, and I'm supposed to accept that, So gacaca was a big part, confessing, and that was facilitated by people who were chosen in the communities by the community members to be facilitators / judges. People could, if they confessed, they could have their prison sentence cut in half. And when I first heard that, I'm like, no way, But restorative justice is at times messy, and there are compromises that happen, and we've got to look at the bigger picture. Are we looking at bringing everyone together and bringing healing for restoring not just the people who committed the crime, restoring the people who had their lives turned upside down, like Maria and family members? How do we restore them? How do we restore the rest of the community? So there's a lot of things about restorative justice that people can argue about, but cut the prison sentence in half. And then they would go and work in what they called a TIG, a TIG camp. And this, I call it a reinvent yourself camp. This is where people are doing projects to benefit the community, not to pay back. You can't pay back, for killing, but to form new pathways in your brain as a perpetrator and new pathways in our other brains as survivors or as bystanders during the genocide. Everybody's in need of new way of, this is my most recent teaching aid. Everybody's in need of way to reframe themselves and reframe the other, reframe a situation. And so Teach camps provided a wonderful opportunity for that. And then when they came home, they found security, they found healthcare, they found education and opportunities to build, like Marie and Filbert building houses together. And those shared experiences here, talk about shared experience in the home. That's the big picture for, I think, did you use the word forgiveness in her question?
Let's see. Sorry,
the reason, whether you did or not, I want to just mention about forgiveness. I think it's really important when we're looking, especially at Rwanda, but at many situations where we've had a betrayal, a loss of trust, a breaking of relationships. That forgiveness means so many different things to different people. For me, I start with the basic foundational dictionary definition. I will no longer be angry or resentful, angry or bitter towards somebody for a fault, a mistake, or an offense, okay? It doesn't mean I'm going to invite them to the wedding. It doesn't mean we're going to be friends. I've got to get free from this anger and bitterness, because this anger and bitterness will be like a cancer, destroy me, potentially destroy relationships, marriages, parental, kid, grandparent. That anger and bitterness, some of you are familiar with the Bible's term, third and fourth generation, type the sins to the third and fourth. So this getting free of anger and bitterness is what I think is an initial part, and we have to find strategies to do that. And we could do a whole nother evening's conversation about those strategies. But I think I love these three that are outlined here because we can apply these in our lives. The idea of learning the truth and telling the truth, even if somebody's not sorry. In a conversation I had with college kids, Davidson College, North Carolina, before the COVID shutdown, one kid said, well, maybe one value of somebody confessing who's not sorry is when they hear the truth come out their mouth and they see, say they're at the soccer field and this 12-year-old girl is listening to the story, an 80-year-old grandma is listening to the story. They will potentially see their story that they're telling people through the lens of the 12-year-old, of the grandma. And maybe that confessing, even without repentance, could be the first step of seeing it through other eyes, because we're masters. I'm a master at rationalizing and self-justifying. But when we see it through the eyes of others, that can be one of the steps. So gachacha, and then actual activities in the community and the opportunity to form new pathways. And somebody comes from a camp where they're doing community projects on the weekend, they come into your church and they start singing, they got a beautiful voice, and you invite them to be part of the choir. Hey, you start to see them different, and we start to have different pathways. And this whole idea of around our home right now in COVID, as people are working together, whether they're at food banks or they're bringing food to elderly people or whatever they're doing, we can come out of COVID so different, turned our world upside down. We can come out so different as we study these stories, join in conversations like tonight, and start practicing some of these things that can help us reframe. Sometimes you wonder if I'm going to ever end on responding.
No. Let's see. We have a lot more questions coming in here. We're doing good, and I
know
say,
some of you need to, and you might feel bad if you leave. We totally get that, huh, Diana? You guys have been with us now for an hour and 20 minutes.
So
yeah.
Well,
but I'm good to keep going.
Okay. Well, we'll keep going, and if you need to sign off, that's totally fine. We totally understand. But thank you for being here. Okay. Let's see. Got a question from Tanya. This is a friend of mine, Tanya.
The other thing, Diana, too, is as we work in the questions and you're working, I think it is important to talk some more too about mental health. So as you're looking through these questions, and I'm happy to talk about my own journey too in terms of mental health, because that's a big part of the work of Handspun. Handspun. Handspun hope. Once I get that pathway in my brain, I'm not even going to say that word again. Handspun hope. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there as you look through the questions before it gets a little too late.
All right. Here's a question from Tanya, Marajo, Carl, and Diana. What medical care was available during the genocide?
I can pretty much speak just from what I saw in Rwanda, in Kigali, the capital. There were two places that I knew of in the half of the city that was controlled by the RPF. By the extremist, the part I was living in. I mentioned to you that road that ends at today's American Embassy, that road that runs along the ridge. Our house was just below Village Uruguiro. Just if you got to the circle at the American Embassy and you turned left down the hill, you'd be in our neighborhood. And so in our section of the city, the Red Cross set up a field hospital in the French school Belgian school. Oh shoot, but anyway, in Kiyovu, they sent up a field hospital. And then the Kigali Central, CHK, the Kigali Central Hospital continued to function throughout the genocide amazingly. I've met some nurses who worked there during the genocide. Unimaginable story. I mean, our hats go off to our health workers right now in COVID time. But during that time, oh man, they would come into the hospital and pull people out of there and kill them. Those nurses worked in the most horrific conditions, the most violent times. And so that was what I knew of in Kigali. On the other side, I heard about King Faisal Hospital had become like a refugee camp. And I believe MSF was doing, Doctors Without Borders was doing some work at King Faisal Hospital on that side. Then throughout the rest of the country, there were some clinics here and there where nurses were trying their best to treat the people, but it was a hard time for folks. People were dying from the smallest, from the small. Well, you saw in the film, kids were dying from diarrhea, before we could start bringing water there.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. It says this one comes from Lena. Says, thank you. This has been really great. I just returned from living in Rwanda for 2.5 years and I miss it. Thank you both for all the work you've done and are continuing to do. I was very interested in your comment about Kambanda and how you were able to get his help to stop the massacre at the orphanage, despite his key role in executing the genocide. Did you come across many people at that time who would at the same time protect some people and then commit terrible atrocities towards others? What do you think that Kambanda Why do you think Kambanda helped the orphanage that day?
Yeah, good. I'm glad you asked that question. I don't have a concrete answer for you. I have some of my best guess, okay? I'm gonna pull this picture back from the film though, because I love this sketch here. Without this secretary, I never would have asked Kambanda to stop that massacre. I never would have thought, no pathway in my head that would say, ask him. Here's my best guess on why he did. We were at the same time, France had come to the Western, okay, not supposed to rub our eyes. Sorry, bad example. France had come to the west side of the country and set up something called Operation Turquoise. So some of you may be familiar. Look that one up if you'd like to, even Wikipedia, you'll learn more. Operation Turquoise, French soldiers supposedly setting up safe havens. I say supposedly because really we saw in the big picture, they were there providing an exit strategy for the planners of the genocide as they fled into the Congo. Exit strategy, exit security. There's so many stories of people who came to the French for protection and then the French packed up camp and left them and they were killed. So Time magazine said, great idea, wrong country. And I won't go too far except to say that there is a lot of evidence that has been brought forth from the government of France's support for the genocide. But that's happening on the west of the country, okay? And so we're in the center, and I think Kambanda realized that his days were numbered here, that the RPF was about to crush them and drive them out of the country. If he could get French soldiers to Kigali under the pretense of that same idea, Operation Turquoise, they could come there under the pretense of protecting people. And I think he wanted to use these orphans as photo op / justification for the French soldiers to come to Kigali. It's not just, that's not just my summer, my imagination. At the time, the same days that this was happening, there were French, the militia were driving around in all the vehicles they had hotwired when the foreigners, most of Europeans fled, they flew out, leaving their vehicles. The militia hotwired their vehicles. They used them in their work of genocide. They started sewing homemade French flags, all the red, white, and blue material they could find, and flying them from the antennas of their, stolen Pajeros, the other SUVs and stuff. There was this excitement in Kigali. I remember a blackboard leaning against a tree that said, "Vive la France." There was this big excitement that the French were coming, the French were coming. That's my best guess as why he did that. But, for me, even more important as to why he did it is the fact that he did something. And the idea that we, in some of our most desperate situations, like for me, I never would have looked there for an ally. I went to that office because I knew that the colonel had proved helpful, but he was out of town that day and his secretary was there. But this idea of finding allies among the group we call the enemy, that's a new brain pathway for me. And that's one that's so worth firing. And it's not just in times of genocide. Okay, I'm weighing whether I should say this or not. I've had a few frustrating experiences with TSA. And the reason I'm weighing what I say here is because I really appreciate that's a hard job that people have to do. But I wasn't looking at it from other perspectives in the early years. I was looking at it from just my perspective. This idea has been really important to me when I'm frustrated or perhaps hurt or angry or confused, afraid. Usually I'm in the center of the universe. It's me. I ask myself this question, who's in the center? When I started, say, putting a TSA officer in the center, what's it like for them? I started having a different perspective. And one day a TSA officer, oh my goodness, he went out to the curb to meet my wife to get my wallet I had forgotten at home. I mean, he went so above and beyond. And that story, I fired that pathway a ton of times. And so this idea of finding allies in unexpected places is a really important one for me from that story, as well as listening to local people, listening to the people who are there. And that secretary, she had the answer. I don't know all. It'd be interesting if we could talk to her and to know why she knew that, but I don't know. Maybe we'll run across her someday. Kambanda not tragically, was captured, convicted, and sentenced. The sad part is in recent years, he started turning around and telling a very different story than his testimony at the time. I think he thought he was going to get leniency or something, which again, even more tragically, some of the planners of the genocide have already been released, which is another point of anger and frustration for me, which is another opportunity for me to reframe that situation and get free. Anger, boy, it's tricky. It hangs out like sleeper cells in our body at times. Yeah. Where are we going next, Diana?
Okay, let's see. We still have a lot of people online, so we're just going to keep asking. As long as you're okay, Carl, you can let me know when you're ready to cut it off to you. Okay. Let's see. From Donald. In Rwanda now, is it taboo to talk about Hutu or Tutsi? Do you think there's been a real change of this form of correctness? Or is this just a form of correctness?
Yeah, good. Thanks for bringing that up. For some years ago, there were some headline stories about illegal to talk Hutu Tutsi. I actually had the privilege of talking with an attorney who was working with the Rwandan government, an American lady, working with the Rwandan government in rewriting their initial genocide ideology laws. You see, this might sound strange to many people, but genocide is not illegal as such. Killing is illegal, but we need to understand that to really address some issues, we have to have legislation behind it to address, because just like we started developing hate crime legislation in America. Yes, somebody was murdered, but they're murdered because of their nationality, because of their religion, their race and stuff. So Rwanda started these genocide ideology laws, and they were, by their own admission, pretty quickly put together after the genocide, and that's why they came back to revise them. And I talked with this lady who was working with them on the revising process, and they are not interested in throwing anyone in jail for saying Hutu or Tutsi, no, but they are very interested in addressing polarizing thinking and polarizing labels. In fact, that's one of my other little drawings to try to understand how do people go this pathway, to harm. How do they do that pathway to harm? And the key word I focus on is polarizing. Or how do they do the pathway to healing? And the key word there we get to explore and focus on in our conversations is restorative. Mm-hmm. So am I talking about Hutus and Tutsis in a polarizing manner or a restorative manner? Mm-hmm. And that's really can be subjective at times. So we're dealing in really what some people would call gray area. But they're working to clarify and identify and bring, I don't know if you got this phrase and if it makes sense to you, but it makes a lot of sense to me, and I'd love to know if it makes sense to other people. When I said it earlier, unexamined subconscious beliefs, these things like the one I mentioned earlier was if somebody's not sorry, their confession is no good. You bring that into the conscious, and for me, that's through journaling. I'm a massive fan of journaling. And then we look at some of these unexamined unconscious. Another one, if you're not angry at the people who killed everybody, you're dishonoring the people who were killed. I don't know if you've heard or thought anything like that, that a person, of course I'm angry at them. Look at all the horrible things they did. And we have this unexamined subconscious belief that being angry is honoring the people who were killed. We bring that into the light and we're like, wait a minute here. If I was killed and my kids found a way to get free from the anger and bitterness, you think I would be like, oh, they're dishonoring me? I'd be so grateful that person who killed me no longer was controlling the lives of my children. Because by breaking free from anger and bitterness, they're breaking the power that the perpetrator has to continue to impact our lives, our happiness, our joy. So your question about Hutu Tutsi, for me, I would look at it in this framework and say, well, for example, I have a friend who survived, and along with a brother, and my friend is doing really amazing in his survival. His brother for years not so well, and like many, turned to alcohol. He gets drunk, he's out on the streets, and he's blankety blank Hutus and stuff. He'll get arrested and put in jail because you just don't, that is polarizing, and we can't have that. Two things were so big in the success of the genocide. One was the radio, and so media is a key point in the rebuilding, and the other is the idea of let me see, how can I say this? The radio, the media, and just the way people talked. I mean, speech. We know there's power in words, and so Rwanda has had to be very intentional in its laws, but it's doing it the best they can. They are doing it the best they can in ways that I think we all can learn a lot from what their ongoing journey in navigating through things that are polarizing. I'm sure, as I said this, you had to be thinking about America, huh? I think about a funny late night show host, and I think to myself, wait a minute, was that polarizing or was that restorative? I think about a label. If I call somebody a killer, is that polarizing? Is that restorative? And honestly, when I mention a late night show host, I don't have this to judge other people by. Oh, that's polarizing. Oh, that's restorative. This has been most helpful for me, for my own self-growth and my own healing, for my own reflection. That's really hard. For me, I'm really trying to replace judgment with curiosity. And that's another tool for me. I even the other day I couldn't find a gavel, so I grabbed a hammer, replacing judgment with curiosity. And so we're still just, I'm a visual learner and I'm an old shop teacher, so I love physical stuff. But thanks for that question.
All right, let's see. Carl and Diana, I was wondering, this is from Cheryl. Hi, Carl and Diana. I was wondering what has been your experience with the effects of counseling for genocide survivors? Ooh.
Yeah, Diana, why don't you respond to that one first?
Okay. You know, that's part of what we do in Rwanda. We offer counseling for all of our ladies, offer trauma counseling. And, you know, we have specific women who are survivors and who have been, you know, have had access to counseling. It's not something that most Rwandans have access to, I'll say that. Right. But I have, you know, a couple of thoughts, a couple of different people come to mind. And we had one woman whose name is Specios, and she is a survivor, hid in the forest, actually gave birth to one of her children while she was hiding. Her family, I believe all her family was murdered. And she came to work for us in 2017, I believe. And, you know, during this period, during the memorial period, April is, you know, for those that don't know, April is the month of remembrance of the genocide. And so that's actually the period we're in right now. And every year after the genocide, following the genocide, Specios would actually have to be admitted to the hospital with PTSD because she couldn't deal with how she was feeling. And so when she came, after she had been working for us for 1 year, I believe this is correct, in 2018, she'd been working for us a year, was the first year that she did not have to be hospitalized because of PTSD. Wow. So, I mean, wonderful. It's been tremendous for the women that are in our employ, under our employ. You know, but again, this is not the normal thing for Rwandans to have counseling, or to have access to counseling.
And so a couple of things I would add to that, and I love those stories are really where the rubber meets the road. And that was one thing. I mean, I was excited when I heard you guys had a sheep project. I'm kind of an old farmer at heart too. And then I heard you bring in rabbits and I'm like, what? Angora rabbits, how cool. But then when I heard you were involved with trauma and counseling, I just really you had me hook, line, and sinker. I'm so excited to see that that's part of your overall thrust. There's another program that happened in Rwanda, not the conventional one that we would look, because obviously Western forms of many things don't fit in other countries. But there are some general threads that run through many things. For example, listening, just being a good listener often, here at home or in any country. That's a thread that's really valuable. And the program that Rwandan lady started, it's called The Book of Life, where she started holding workshops for people to write stories to the family members they lost. Because often, and I think many of us in America can connect to this with the tragedy of suicide. With the tragedy of suicide, it's one that we're like, it's preventable so often. And it's just like, we don't know how to wrap our mind around it at times, subconsciously, until we start to examine it, you know, consciously, bring it out in the open. But what it also does is it can hijack a person's legacy. So every time we talk about, you know, let's just say Paul, we don't think about all the wonderful sense of humor, the sports, the way he could play the flute. We go, oh yeah, Paul, he committed, we don't say it out loud, but we fire that pathway in our brain, he committed suicide. So it's like that final act becomes the definition of the person in many of our minds, which is a real tragedy. And in Rwanda, you can understand how the genocide can become the overall label or definition of somebody who was killed during that time. So as Kiki is this lady's name, or her one of her names she goes by. I mean, she's an actor. She's a professional dreamer, actually. There's a great film, if you get a chance to check out, Sweet Dreams, the Rwandan women drummers, and they have an ice cream store in Butare, Huye. But she started doing these workshops for people to write letters. I'll just give you a couple examples. One was a young lady who was, she started doing this workshop when she was in university studying nursing. And I think she was probably about 12 at the time of the genocide. And she wrote a letter to her dad, who was killed in the genocide. And she wrote all kinds of things in the letter. She wrote, "Dad, you'd be surprised at how many of the kids in our neighborhood have gone on to college. Dad, we have cell phones now. You probably wouldn't know how to use it, you know." Dad, in anatomy lab the other day, we were looking at the structure of muscles and bones and things, and I couldn't help but think about your wounds. And if I would have known some of the skills I know now, if I would have known then, what difference I might have made. But you understand what's happening here is she's reconnecting with the legacy of her father, because as she writes to him, her memories of her father come back to her. And so her father, and then she jokes and says, "Yeah, actually, Dad, Grandma knows how to work a cell phone," which really surprised us all, you know. But it's just this way of trying to unfreeze the frozen legacy of somebody that's frozen in this cocoon called genocide. The one other thing that I'd share with you in terms of the healing is the ability to come together and share with each other. I have a lot of friends in Rwanda who in high school, and for some of them it was college, they didn't have hardly any family. And we all know how important family is. In developing countries like Rwanda, it's like even 10 times more important, extended family. And when so much of your family is killed, you know, whether it's school holidays or whether you're looking for a job and somebody helping to open a door. So they started forming families themselves, among the student groups, even to the point of naming, you know, "Thomas, you're such a good listener. We want you to be the dad." You know, and "Sarah, oh my goodness, you are always there. You're like a rock. We want you to be the mom." And as these people have grown up and gotten married, their kids now have aunts and uncles. Their kids have cousins because of that choice that the parents made high school or in college to form families. And those are, that's incredibly inspiring to me, because it really focuses on what you have instead of what you lost. And one of my friends who did get some counseling, and when he talks to students about it, he says, "Most days when I wake up," he's really honest. He's not kind of like a blanket statement every day. "Most days when I wake up, I ask myself 2 questions. Am I going to focus on what I have or what I don't have?" And most of the time, I choose to focus on what I have. And I'm like, that right there is brilliant. Every morning he recognizes he has a choice. He can fire pathways of what he doesn't have or what he has. And he's honest enough and human enough to say, you know, not always, but most days, I choose to focus on what I have. And that philosophy of being defined by what we have or what we do next is an incredibly healing philosophy, even without the formal counseling. You saw me get up and disappear a minute ago because I wanted to grab this book. If you'd love to read a story about Rwanda and a survivor and her journey to healing afterwards, this story is Celine Uwineza. Yeah, am I saying that right? Yeah, Uwineza. Celine was 10 years old, and the book is called Untamed. I really couldn't recommend more highly. It's hard, the first half of her story during the genocide, but the second half, her honesty, her vulnerability. Oh my goodness, I would love to see her and Brené Brown in the same place sometime when you talk about healing and vulnerability and those things. But this is really a book I definitely would recommend as we explore and unpack that healing more.
All right. Thank you, Carl. I've got, I think we've got just about everything covered. I have one from Kay Walking. She says, where does Carl and his family live now? What is he doing?
Oh, thank you very much, Kay. We'll take that opportunity to, okay, what did I do with my phone? Here we go. To pop up, my wife and I, in 2008, we started an organization called World Outside My Shoes. We thought it was a really clever name, but nobody can remember it, and I've regretted it for years. But anyway, it's called World Outside My Shoes. So worldoutsitemyshoes.org is the website, and my email. Happy to hear from folks. You know, the conversation we've had tonight, I'm really grateful for the questions, and I'd love it for it to be even more interactive. And so if you'd like to do a conversation, if you're an educator with a school group or with a faith group or even a business group, a group of your business colleagues, and you want to talk about respect, empathy, and inclusion, those are the three values we really look at. Oh, by the way, we live in Spokane, Washington, and I spend about 2 weeks every month traveling to schools, faith groups, business groups around the country, sharing Rwanda's stories, both the falling apart part of the story and the putting it back together. And so these days we're trying to do it as much as possible. That's why I've kind of got a little setup here at home with a screen behind me, so that I'm talking with students from Poland to Taiwan and Minnesota and Miami to really explore this idea. Those three words might just sound like great words to you, but check out this little drawing here. There we go, right here. If and this is how, in case you're wondering, and for those of you who stuck by so long, man, 34, you're amazing. Thank you for sticking around. I just want to tell you how the world works, okay? You've stuck around long enough. Here's how the world works, okay? We all want purpose. We all just hunger for purpose, and we hunger for community. So how we can keep purpose and community in healthy relationship, we start with this word, respect. Am I getting that in the screen there? We have a habitat, I love that word, habitat of respect, where we can begin to learn each other's stories. And as we learn each other's stories, empathy, we connect the dots. You tell me, oh, there were 3 kids in your family. The 3 boys, I had 2 older brothers. As we connect the dots, empathy just grows. That's how I believe we're wired. And I think that's how we're made, with this innate wiring for empathy, but there's things that short circuit that. And so when we start learning each other's stories and connecting the dots, we're like, hey, you should come over. We're doing a barbecue. Or, okay, well, we got not until COVID's over, but we're gonna do a Zoom or some session. Inclusion becomes just a natural flow instead of like, oh, we got to include. I don't even know what line. We don't start with inclusion. We start with respect, and we don't decide who gets respect. That's just how I want to roll. I want to treat everybody with respect. I want to learn the stories, and that curiosity, respect, empathy, inclusion. Those are some of the tools we hope to leave behind. I got a little collection of tools. You've seen some pictures, but that's sort of what we're doing now, is sharing those stories. Most of the time with high school and middle school, college students, but it's beginning to grow more with faith groups and with business groups. So thanks for giving me that chance to put in the little plug for World Outside My Shoes.
Oh, and Carl, thank you for sharing your email address with everyone too. I just,
absolutely.
I think, I would just like to really thank you for doing this with us tonight. I know this is a new thing for you, so it was new for us, and it was just very exciting to have you on.
To screen the film. I'm so sorry we had that little glitch there, but usually in all our practices, it was running fine there. And Diana, if some people would like to share that film with their community or something, if they come onto our website, we just make it available either streaming or hard copy DVD for a donation. So if they want to come and do that, they can get the film there from our website, worldoutsitemyshoes.org, if you can remember that name, or you just Google the American.
I can send out an email to everyone who participated, and I'll send them your information. That'll be great.
Maybe too, did I share the story about Maria and Filbert with you? We could maybe share that story with the listeners too. You'll get the bigger version. get the short version, Morgan Freeman version on the story of us. The short version this evening, but I wrote up about a 3,500 word version.
Yes, I have that. I will forward that as well. I'll forward that as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you, Diana, for this opportunity.
Thank you for everyone that's has been here for 2 hours. Thank you, and we really, really appreciate it. Carl, we thank you, and like to thank Amy and Christy on our staff in the U.S. for helping us facilitate this as well. So, and Robbie, I know he was a big help to you. So, thank you very much.
And a big thanks too here to our Rwandan family. You know, this is, as we mentioned at the beginning, these are the 100 days that are really tough. And as you know from your years in Rwanda. And so I think maybe we could just wrap with this little, I came up with a drawing the other day. You know, Maria and Filbert were at this center where there were men and women who'd suffered as spouses of perpetrators, or even perpetrators suffered, which is often something that can be a sensitive topic, but survivors too. And some of our students this summer said, how do you do it? How do you get through this? And these ladies said that our pain, it's our pain that drives us deeper into love. A minute. Pain often seems to drive us into anger or depression, but they said, no, it's this, and I use the word radical love. I don't speak Kinyarwanda, which I have a big regret, but that as the translators were translating, the best I could understand is as we express love to others, even those who did wrong, we're not drowning we were drowning in our pain and sorrow, but this love is like a lifeboat. And as we practice that love to others, it's teaching us more and more about what real love is. And I just wanted to kind of say thank you, and particular honoring as we close this evening to the Rwandans who are still putting one foot in front of the other every day, and to remember the legacy of those who were lost, because we're still seeing it. One of my friends who survived, little 9-year-old, lost so much of his family, and they just had a baby boy. And I said, you know, I'm so sorry your family wasn't there, but I said your family sort of was there in you and your wife, the values, the courage, the resilience. And so so I just, thanks for giving me a couple extra minutes to just kind of highlight that idea. And I look forward to the next time we get to cross paths, and maybe we'll screen another little film and have another conversation with your community. Great. Would love to.
We would love that.
Thanks so much.
Carl. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone. The Rwanda wave goodbye. That felt natural, Carl.
It is, especially with physical distancing.
Yes.
We're doing this.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Thanks. Good night, folks.